My wife said, "My ex is just a friend." I believed her for years. Then one night, I found a hotel reservation with his name on it. I almost confronted her right away, until I saw the date. It was the same night she told me she was working late. My wife, Lauren, and I had been married for 7 years, and for most of that time, I never had a serious reason to doubt her. We met through mutual friends, dated for almost 2 years, and had what I thought was a solid relationship before getting married. Lauren was confident, social, and the kind of person who could talk to anyone. I was quieter and more private, but somehow our personalities worked. She always told me that she loved how calm I was, and I loved that she could make almost any boring day feel interesting. The only person I never completely understood was her ex, Jason. He had been in her life before me, and she never hid that. When we first started dating, she told me they had dated for about 3 years but had ended things long before we met. I asked if they still talked, and she said they occasionally checked in because they had mutual friends. That seemed reasonable. I didn't want to be the jealous boyfriend who demanded that his girlfriend erase everyone from her past. So when Jason's name came up occasionally, I ignored it. After we got married, though, I started noticing that Jason wasn't just some old friend. He was still part of Lauren's life. She would get texts from him late at night, and sometimes she'd smile at her phone in a way that made me curious. If I asked who it was, she'd simply say, "Jason, he's just a friend." The first few times, I believed her without question. Eventually, I started noticing little things that didn't make sense. She never seemed uncomfortable talking about him, but she also never mentioned him when we were around other people. If someone asked how she knew Jason, she'd give a vague answer and change the subject. One Saturday afternoon, I asked her directly, "Do you still see him?" She looked surprised. "Sometimes." "Why?" I told her I didn't care if they were friends, but I didn't want there to be secrets between us. She walked over, kissed my forehead, and said, "There are no secrets. Jason is my past. You're my husband." That answer was enough for me. For years, I let the subject disappear. Then about 6 months ago, Lauren started working later than usual. At first, it was once or twice a week. Then it became almost every Friday. She always had a reason: a client meeting, a presentation, a deadline. One Friday night, she called me around 8 and said, "Don't wait up. I'm probably going to be here late." I asked what time she'd be home. She said maybe midnight. I told her to be careful and went to bed. She came home after 1 in the morning. The next day, she apologized and said the project had gotten out of control. I believed her. Then, a few months later, something happened that I still can't explain. Lauren was away for the weekend visiting her sister, and I was cleaning out some old files in our home office when I found a hotel rewards envelope tucked inside a drawer. I almost threw it away. Then I noticed the reservation details printed on the back. The reservation was under Jason's name. I checked the date. It was from 3 weeks earlier. I remembered that Friday perfectly because Lauren had told me she was working late that night. I stared at the paper, trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe she had booked something for someone else. Maybe Jason had used her account. Maybe the reservation had nothing to do with her. Then I noticed the second name listed on the reservation. It was Lauren's. I sat down slowly, holding the paper in my hand. I didn't call her. I didn't text her. I just stared at those two names together and realized that for the first time in 7 years, I had no idea where my wife had actually been that night. I spent the rest of that weekend trying to find a reasonable explanation before letting my mind go somewhere darker. Lauren came home Sunday evening, smiled, kissed me, and started telling me about her sister's new apartment like nothing had happened. I watched her carefully. She seemed completely normal, which somehow made everything worse. I wanted to pull the hotel reservation out of my pocket and put it on the table, but I stopped myself. If there was an innocent explanation, I didn't want to accuse my wife of cheating based on one piece of paper. So instead, I asked casually, "How was Friday night?" She didn't even hesitate. "Exhausting. I told you that project almost killed me." I nodded. "What time did you leave the office?" She thought for a second and said, "Around 12:30, maybe 1. The answer made my stomach tighten. The hotel reservation showed check-in at 9:14 p.m. I had proof that something didn't match, but I still wasn't ready to confront her. That night, after Lauren went to bed, I opened the hotel website and checked the reservation number. It showed a room for 2 people. Check-in Friday evening. Check-out Saturday morning. The guest name was Jason Miller. Lauren's name was listed as an additional guest. I stared at the screen until my eyes hurt. I knew what it looked like, but there was something about the reservation that bothered me even more. The hotel was nearly 40 minutes from Lauren's office and less than 15 minutes from Jason's apartment. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I decided I needed to know where Lauren had actually been before I asked her anything. I checked the shared credit card we used for household expenses. There was no hotel charge. That meant she hadn't paid for the room with our card. I checked our joint bank account. Nothing. Then I remembered Lauren had a personal credit card that she rarely used. I didn't have access to it, and I wasn't going to secretly search through her belongings just to prove something I already suspected. Instead, I looked at our phone bill. We had separate numbers, but the account showed call records. Jason's number appeared repeatedly. Some calls were only a few minutes long. Others lasted more than an hour. The strangest part was that most of the longer calls happened late at night, usually after I had gone to sleep. I sat there staring at the dates. Then I noticed something else. The night of the hotel reservation, Lauren had called Jason at 7:42 p.m. The call lasted 23 minutes. At 8:15, Jason called her back. That call lasted almost 40 minutes. The hotel check-in was at 9:14. I felt like I was putting together pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. Still, I needed more than phone records. That evening, Lauren went upstairs to shower, and I stayed in the living room. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I wasn't planning to touch it. Then I saw the name on the screen. Jason. The message preview said, "We need to talk about what happened that night." My entire body went still. Lauren came downstairs moments later and grabbed the phone before I could say anything. She glanced at the screen, then looked at me. "What?" she asked. I told her Jason had messaged. She nodded and said, "I'll deal with it." I asked, "Deal with what?" She frowned. "It's nothing." Couldn't hold it in anymore. I said, "Is that what happened at the hotel?" Her expression changed instantly. She didn't ask which hotel. She didn't ask what I meant. She simply stood there, staring at me. That was the moment I knew she had been hiding something. "How did you find out?" she finally whispered. I pulled the reservation from my pocket and placed it on the counter. Lauren looked at it, and the color drained from her face. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "You need to let me explain before you decide what happened." I looked at her and asked, "Then explain why you were in a hotel room with your ex while you told me you were working." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. And after a few seconds, she quietly said, "Because Jason wasn't the reason I went there." I didn't know what to say to that. "Then what was the reason?" I asked. Lauren sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the reservation like she was trying to figure out where to begin. Finally, she said, "Jason contacted me because he found something that belonged to my father." That wasn't the answer I expected. Her father had passed away 5 years earlier, and I knew how difficult that loss had been for her. I asked what Jason could possibly have that belonged to him. Lauren told me that after her father's death, her family had sold most of his belongings, but Jason had recently been helping a mutual friend clean out an old storage unit. Inside, he found a locked metal box with Lauren's father's name written on it. He didn't know what was inside, so he called Lauren. I asked why they needed a hotel room to talk about a box. She looked embarrassed and said the storage facility had strict hours, and Jason had already moved the box to the hotel because he needed somewhere secure to keep it overnight. I still wasn't satisfied. "And you couldn't tell me any of this?" I asked. She shook her head. "I was going to." I laughed bitterly. "When?" "After 7 years." She looked down. Then she admitted there was more. The box contained old financial records, photographs, and several documents connected to Lauren's father's business. One document had a name that neither of them recognized. Lauren said she became worried because the document suggested her father had been secretly sending money to someone for years. She didn't know who the person was or why he had been paying them. Jason had helped her because he knew how to search public records and trace old business information. I asked why she had lied about working late. She said she knew how I felt about Jason, and she was afraid I'd assume the worst. I told her that hiding a hotel reservation with her ex was exactly what made me assume the worst. She started crying and said, "I know. I made it look terrible." I wanted to believe her, but the timing still bothered me. Then I asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Did anything happen between you and Jason?" She looked directly at me and said, "No." Her answer was immediate. I asked again. "Nothing." She shook her head. "Nothing." I wanted to trust her, but then Jason's message appeared on her phone again. "We need to talk about what happened that night." Pointed at it. "Then what does that mean?" Lauren looked at the message and sighed. She said Jason wasn't talking about the two of them. He was talking about what they had discovered inside the hotel room. According to her, they had opened the metal box and found a second envelope taped underneath the lid. Inside was a photograph of Lauren's father standing with a woman neither of them recognized. On the back of the photograph was a date from 22 years ago and a handwritten note saying, "If anyone ever asks, she was never here." Lauren told me that was when she became frightened. I asked who the woman was. She said she didn't know, but Jason had spent the last 3 weeks trying to identify her. Then Lauren looked at me and said, "That's why I couldn't tell you." I asked why she trusted Jason with something this serious but couldn't trust her own husband. She didn't have a good answer. She just said she was scared of what we might discover. I thought the conversation was finally moving toward the truth until Jason called. Lauren answered on speaker. He sounded nervous. "Lauren, you need to come over," he said. She asked why. He replied, "Because I found out who that woman is." There was a pause. Then he said something that made both of us freeze. "She's still alive, and she's been looking for you." Lauren slowly lowered the phone. I asked who the woman was. She stared at me with tears in her eyes. "I think she's my mother." I knew her mother had died when Lauren was a teenager. At least that's what she'd always told me. But now I realized there was a part of my wife's family history that even I had never heard about. And suddenly, the hotel reservation wasn't the biggest secret in our marriage anymore. I stared at Lauren, waiting for her to explain what she had just said. But she couldn't seem to get the words out. "Your mother is dead," I finally said. "That's what you've always told me." Lauren nodded slowly. "That's what I believed too." She explained that her father had told her mother died when Lauren was 15. There had been a funeral, family photos, and years of grief. As far as Lauren knew, there was nothing mysterious about it. But the photograph had changed everything. The woman standing beside her father looked almost exactly like Lauren, just younger. Jason had spent the last few days searching old records, and he'd found a woman living in another state under a different last name. Her age matched, her birthday matched, and there was one other detail that made Lauren believe they had found her. The woman's original name was Laura Bennett, the same name written on the back of the photograph. Lauren's hands were shaking as she showed me the picture. I looked at it and immediately noticed something else. Around the woman's neck was a necklace I had seen before. Lauren wore the exact same necklace on our wedding day. I asked where she got it. She said it had belonged to her mother and had been given to her by her father when she turned 18. That meant the woman in the photograph really could be her mother. But there was still one thing I couldn't understand. Why would her father tell everyone she had died? Before Lauren could answer, Jason called again. This time he said he had spoken to the woman. Her name was actually Laura, and she claimed she had never died. She told Jason that Lauren's father had forced her to disappear after discovering something about their marriage. According to Laura, she had left because she believed Lauren would be safer without her. I could see Lauren struggling to process all of it. Then Jason said something that changed the conversation completely. "There's something else," he told her. "Your father wasn't paying Laura all those years. He was paying someone else to keep her away from you." Lauren asked who. Jason said he didn't know yet, but he had found bank records showing regular payments to a private investigator. The payments had started shortly after Lauren's mother supposedly died and continued for almost 15 years. I asked why someone would spend that much money keeping a mother away from her own daughter. Jason said he had one theory, but he wanted to show us the evidence first. Lauren looked at me and asked if I would come with her. I said yes. For the first time since finding the hotel reservation, I wasn't thinking about Jason as a threat. I was thinking about how much of Lauren's life had been hidden from her. We drove to a small office where Jason had been working with the records. When we arrived, he showed us copies of the old bank statements. One name appeared repeatedly as the recipient of the payments. It wasn't Laura. It wasn't a private investigator. It was Lauren's uncle, Richard. Lauren went completely silent. She had always been close to Richard. He had practically helped raise her after her mother supposedly died. She couldn't understand why he would be involved. Jason then showed us a scanned letter from Lauren's father. The letter was addressed to Richard and contained one sentence that made Lauren start crying. "You promised me she would never learn what really happened." Lauren looked at me and whispered, "What happened?" Before anyone could answer, there was a knock on the office door. A woman stood outside. She was older, nervous, and holding a small brown envelope against her chest. Lauren immediately recognized her from the photograph. It was Laura. Her mother was alive. Laura looked at Lauren for several seconds before whispering, "I'm sorry it took me this long." Lauren couldn't move. Then Laura looked at me and said something I wasn't expecting. "Your wife didn't lie to you because of Jason. She lied because she was trying to protect you from what happened to her father." I asked what she meant. Laura's eyes filled with tears. "He didn't die naturally." The room went completely silent. "Someone killed him," she said, "and the person who knows why is still close to Lauren." I looked at Lauren, then at Jason. Nobody spoke. Then Laura placed the brown envelope on the table and said, "Everything you need to know is inside." I looked at the envelope on the table but didn't touch it. Lauren was staring at her mother as if she was afraid that opening it would make everything real. Finally, she reached for it and slowly pulled out several folded papers and an old photograph. The first document was a police report from 22 years earlier. I read the first few lines and immediately understood why Laura had been afraid to come back. Lauren's father hadn't died from natural causes. His death had originally been investigated as an accident, but the report showed that someone had tampered with his car before the crash. The investigation had eventually been closed because there wasn't enough evidence to identify who had done it. Lauren looked at her mother and whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" Laura started crying. She explained that after the accident, Richard had threatened her. He told her that if she tried to contact Lauren, she would put her daughter in danger. Laura had been terrified, especially because Richard had convinced her that Lauren's father had been involved with dangerous people through his business. She disappeared because she believed staying away was the only way to keep Lauren alive. I asked Laura why she had suddenly decided to come back now. She looked at Jason, then at Lauren. Because I received a message 3 weeks ago, she said. Someone told me Lauren had started looking into her father's records. Lauren immediately asked who sent it. Laura shook her head. I don't know. It came from an unknown number. Then she handed us another piece of paper. Contained a short message. If she finds the truth, Richard will know. Lauren's face went pale. I asked why Richard would care about an investigation after 22 years. Laura said because the money from Lauren's father's business had never disappeared. Someone had been secretly controlling it, and Richard had benefited from it for years. Jason had already found evidence that several accounts connected to Lauren's father had been transferred into companies controlled by Richard. But there was one problem. None of us knew whether Richard had actually been responsible for the accident. We needed proof. Lauren decided to confront him. I wanted to go with her, but she insisted that she needed to do it herself. Eventually, I convinced her to let me come, and Jason stayed nearby in case something went wrong. When we arrived at Richard's house, he opened the door with a smile. The moment he saw Laura standing behind us, that smile disappeared. He stepped backward and whispered, "You." Laura didn't say anything. Lauren walked inside and placed the police report on the table. "Tell me what happened to Dad." Richard looked at the paper and then at her. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he sat down. "Your father was going to destroy everything," he finally said. I asked what he meant. Richard admitted that Lauren's father had discovered he was stealing money from the family business. He had threatened to expose him. Richard claimed he never intended for him to die. He had paid someone to scare him into staying quiet, but the situation had gone too far. Lauren looked sick. "You killed my father." Richard shook his head. "I didn't mean for that to happen." That sentence was almost worse. Then he admitted something else. The person he had hired had kept evidence of everything and had been blackmailing him for years. That explained the secret payments and why he had worked so hard to keep Laura away from Lauren. He was terrified that Laura would eventually tell her daughter the truth. I thought that was the end of the secrets, but then Richard looked directly at me and said, "There's one thing you don't understand." I asked what it was. He said, "The hotel wasn't about Jason." I felt my stomach tighten. Richard told me that someone had been watching Lauren for months, and the hotel reservation was deliberately planted so I would find it. The person behind the anonymous messages wanted me to believe Lauren was cheating because they knew I would confront her and expose everything. I asked who was sending the messages. Richard looked toward Laura and said, "The man who was blackmailing me." Then my phone buzzed. Another unknown message appeared. "Richard is lying. Ask Jason where he really got the hotel reservation." I slowly turned toward Jason. For the first time since meeting him, he wouldn't look me in the eyes. And suddenly, I wondered if I had been wrong about him from the very beginning. I looked at Jason and asked, "Where did you really get that hotel reservation?" He didn't answer. Lauren stepped closer to him. "Jason, tell us the truth." He finally admitted that the reservation had come from someone who had contacted him anonymously. That person claimed to have evidence about Lauren's father and told Jason to get Lauren to the hotel if he wanted the truth. Jason said he never expected me to find the reservation. He thought he was helping Lauren uncover her family's past without dragging me into it. I asked why he hadn't told me any of this. He looked embarrassed and said, "Because I knew how it would look." I told him that wasn't good enough. He had allowed me to believe my wife was meeting him behind my back while he knew exactly how suspicious the situation was. Then Jason revealed the final piece. The person who had been sending all of us messages wasn't Richard's blackmailer. It was the private investigator Richard had hired 22 years earlier. The investigator had kept copies of every document and had continued watching the family long after Richard stopped paying him. He had recently discovered that the evidence was worth money and wanted everyone fighting each other so he could sell the information to the highest bidder. The hotel reservation had been part of his plan. He knew Lauren and Jason were meeting there, so he planted the reservation details where I would eventually find them. The anonymous messages were designed to make me suspect my wife, while the messages sent to Lauren and Jason pushed them deeper into the investigation. He wanted us confused, angry, and separated. Once the truth came out, the police became involved. The investigator was eventually identified through phone records and financial transactions. The evidence he had collected also helped investigators reopen the case surrounding Lauren's father's death. Richard was arrested for his role in the cover-up and financial fraud. Laura finally gave a full statement, and Lauren was able to learn the truth about the mother she had spent most of her life believing was dead. But the hardest conversation was the one Lauren and I had after everything was over. She sat beside me in our living room and said, I know you thought I was cheating. I admitted that I had. I saw that hotel reservation and thought my entire marriage had been a lie. She started crying and said, I should have told you about Jason. I told her she should have. I also admitted that if she had told me everything from the beginning, I probably would have still been suspicious, but I wouldn't have spent those days imagining the worst. She reached for my hand and said, I was afraid you'd leave me. I told her, I almost did, and you didn't even know why. That was the moment we both realized how badly secrecy had damaged our trust. We decided to stay together, but we agreed that things couldn't go back to the way they were. No more hidden phones. No more secret meetings. No more protecting each other by keeping important truths hidden. As for Jason, I never became his friend, but I stopped seeing him as the man who was trying to steal my wife. He had made mistakes, but he had also helped uncover the truth. Lauren eventually met her mother regularly, and watching those two rebuild their relationship was strange and painful at the same time. They had lost years they could never get back. Months later, I found the old hotel reservation again while cleaning my desk. I almost threw it away, but I kept it. Not because I wanted to remember the suspicion. I kept it because that piece of paper taught me something I didn't understand before. Sometimes the thing that looks like proof of betrayal is actually evidence of a much bigger truth. My wife had told me, Jason is just a friend, and I had spent years wondering whether she was lying. In the end, she wasn't cheating on me, but she was hiding something, and that secrecy nearly destroyed the trust between us anyway. If I could go back to that night, I would still investigate the reservation, but I would handle it differently. I would ask questions before making accusations. Because after everything that happened, I learned that trust doesn't mean believing someone blindly. It means giving them the chance to tell you the truth before you decide what their silence means.